Welcome to the We Talk Careers podcast, brought to you by Women in ETFs. This is Kristine Delano, and I'm thrilled you've joined me. If you're pursuing excellence in your own career or intrigued by the hustle required for a career on Wall Street, this podcast is for you. We've made all this advice accessible. Grab your own Thrive Guide with a workbook on leadership skills at KristineDelano.com. So, put aside that massive to-do list and let's get inspired. On today's episode, we talked to Deb Yang about the intersection of clarity of mind and AI. How is it that we can combine what we feel, how we can do it, and where we can make the most impact? Well, Deb's going to break it down for us, and it has a lot to do with how we start our day. Deborah Yang is the CEO of Daisy.com that builds AI agents to drive growth and scale human capital for financial services. Deb is a seasoned veteran of the financial services industry. Most recently, she has served as the global head of ESG Index for MSCI and is regarded as one of the industry's leading experts in the world of sustainable investing. She also led many high-growth franchises, including Europe and Asia, as well as ESG indexes and factor investing globally over her 18 years at MSCI. A graduate of Harvard Business School, Deb has been named Financial News 100 Most Influential Women in European Finance for 6 consecutive years. She is also the co-head of Women in ETFs in EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. As CEO of Daisy, she is a frequent conference speaker and has appeared extensively in financial and tech media, including Forbes, Fast Company, Yahoo Finance, The Street, and NPR. Welcome, Deb, to the We Talk Careers podcast. It is so great to have you on the show.
Such a pleasure to be here. I was just really enjoying listening to these podcasts over the years, and I can't tell you how much I love them. Great work, amazing guests, and these topics that are just so nourishing. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so happy you are, and adding to our incredible guests that we have had over the seasons, and just the idea that we can make so many great women accessible to our leadership and to folks that are looking to climb the ladder in financial services and other industries. So thank you for joining the ranks there. I'm sort of hearkened back to, I think you're in Paris today. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't know, what was it, like a month ago or so, we were on a call and you were on Zoom and you had your camera on for just a moment. And I stopped you and I was like, hey, where are you? And you're like, I'm just trying to walk the streets. So I'm turning my camera off. I'm like, please turn it back on. I want to see Paris. So I love how much you travel, that I can often, like find a way to like live vicariously through your exciting life. So
thanks, Kristine. I mean, yeah. I also really miss having roots, having been away from the U.S. for 18, 20 years. So
yes.
Want what you don't have.
I know it is always that. And I think that really kind of comes to what we're talking about today with clarity of mind, is this idea of we have to live in the tension, but seeing our way through it. And so I'm excited for your pro tips on how we can align what we want with how we can make impact to what we get paid for, to what's actually possible, all those things, so that we can sort of come to life with a little bit of clarity and to our jobs. So maybe start us out with a story, like where in your life, what was a time that maybe clarity of mind became front and center?
Yes, a few years ago, I've worked with many very successful leaders in financial services, and there aren't that many women in financial services. There aren't that many women in tech as well. And you're really surrounded by a culture, which I think has improved a lot over the years, but there's still a lot of energy and competition and tension. And what one day I remember a meeting I was presenting, and of course we always over-prepare our meetings. That the team prepared this analysis of history to talk about a little bit of things that we could have done better in order to sell an idea for innovation. But what we may have missed was that we were actually angering, really creating hostility with a leader I was working with in the room. It was a small room of like 10 people, but all vested with their fiefdoms. And really, you could see when the emotions start to rise, that's a very clear signal that you're losing your state of mind. It's no longer clear, and you're moving into a nebulous, different direction, which proceeded to become counterproductive. It created a lot of distress, shouting, emotional tension, and ultimately counterproductive for our mutual goals. And so, to me, that's an example of a state of mind emergency. And I go back to that one incident, which was quite distressing for myself and my team. I don't think we could have resolved it on our own. The companies all thought we were successful people, but they don't always work together well. And so it wasn't until we had to put ourselves out of the circumstance, walk away, come back in with a fresh slate, and to really have an assessment, which I often use, is how much could I have done better? How much could we blame others for the situation? But I think ultimately there's some ownership on what you can improve, and it really requires that you have a state of mind that is clear. And with a clear state of mind, you can ultimately 10x your productivity. And so slowing down, addressing the issues, working with a process, and then coming back to high productivity levels. I think that's a really important thing that I've leveraged throughout my career. We've heard so much from mentorship and great advice over the years, but how do you pull it all together? It's having that quiet time where you shut down the noise and you turn off, if you can, the anxiety that builds up and the inner critic and all the other noise and distraction that you have all day long. And that is that ultimate place where the best things happen.
I think that that's such a good example of how we can go from just sort of a general level of tension in our workplace, which, is actually a good thing that there is tension, because if we don't acknowledge it, we try to sort of manage it out. And you really can't. For example, budgets are always going to be in tension between what we're going to spend in marketing and what we're going to spend in research, or we're going to live in tension of how we're going to work with growth versus sustainability versus development. There's just that level of tension. But because we live in this companies that are doing well, embrace the tension and able to manage the tension, the overflow of tension into conflict
Right.
can happen pretty quickly, right? And
Yeah.
can be very alarming for folks that maybe haven't seen it happen before, or believe that maybe relationships are ruined and we've failed entirely. But to be able to sort of come back with some clarity, be able to sort of like turn off that noise and say, what are the most important pieces of what we're bringing back? How can we sort of assume some responsibility for how we behaved?
Right.
And knowing you probably took on more responsibility for the blame than you should have.
As many of us do, right?
As many of us do, absolutely. But it also kind of gets us back to the place of being able to see real growth in our relationships. And in that case, a place of sort of innovation and the companies having to sort of work together. So
I would absolutely argue that if you're not in challenging environments on a regular basis and you're not fearing and you're embracing the potential of failure, you're not pushing yourself enough. And so if we go back to the idea of this podcast is really about innovation and how do you create an environment for innovation to thrive. I think having the clarity of thought in addition to frameworks for success is crucial. Ultimately, without that clarity of thinking, it becomes entirely difficult. And not everything is such a big emergency. You don't want to have these giant emergencies in your life, but clarity of thought is helpful all through your everyday thinking if you could really bring it down to a daily practice.
Mm. So take us through with your current endeavor, what you're CEO of. How has clarity of thought from the beginning been part of your practice for being able to manage?
Well, working in a very new, innovative world, AI 4 or 5 years ago, when it wasn't as AI everything as it is today, you really have to learn the pace of innovation, and pivots are so rapid. The agility that you take in new information, there's just not that much to research. You just have to test and try, learn, fail, try again, but be resilient and try again and pivot again. So when we started, we had a mission in mind to give financial freedom to this next generation of investors through AI tools, giving insights to the Robinhood generation. And having that kind of mission was fantastic, but then you have to figure out how to actually get paid with the business model. We then pivoted from a pure B2C to a B2B2C, where we were feeding insights to others who had massive audiences who could benefit from these insights that were generated through an AI engine. It started with Ask Daisy, something about financial services, which didn't alienate the next generation, young investors, female investors, where there are obvious investment gaps. And that was the mission. And over time, we've now pivoted to also to include B2B businesses, where we're serving near and dear to our hearts, the ETF industry, asset managers, banks, stock exchanges. And so it's quite important to be agile, to continue to learn and be able to pivot and change as you're building a category that doesn't exist.
So impressive, Deb, that you are building this category and you are looking at AI in such a powerful way to sort of enable this literacy, even as you pivot on the delivery model for doing it. Wow. So take us back to your kind of the top of your game at MSCI. How did you use clarity of thought to get from there to deciding to be CEO of Daisy.com?
So I think everyone has a different framework that they've tested. And for me, the innovation framework is to make sure you generate ideas. Women are great at this. They're great at research. It informs yourself. You inform yourself. You feed your curiosity, read, nourish yourself. But perhaps people tend to analyze too much, because if you're building something new, you cannot analyze what the future will look like. So analyze a little bit, collect the facts, and then go external, ask questions, talk to people. People love to talk and exchange, and leverage your community and your network. I think that's really important, to bounce ideas off. And then you have to really place your bets. Asset management 101 is place as many bets as you can, and particularly bets that can move the needle. No matter what job you do at MSCI, when I worked, we innovated constantly in what was a cost center of Morgan Stanley that eventually became a company that was 45 billion market cap. And so really important to continue to place those bets, move the needle. And the clarity of thought is how you improve the quality of your bets, because you can bounce it through those frameworks.
And how do you know what you're clearing out of your mind? How do you know what's noise and what's important to actually move the needle on the quality of your bets?
I think it takes a lot of practice. Noise, there's a lot of it. Most of it is noise, I would say. You spend a lot of time when you ask questions, you learn a lot, you absorb, you learn things that you liked and who you want to emulate and aspire to be. And you also learn who you don't want to be like. So there's a lot of that information, and you collect it over time. And then it sometimes feeds your ego, it feeds your fears, and the noise that you want to push away are the noise that's not productive. It's just telling you Deb, you're moving to a new company, you can't be CEO, as opposed to being constructive. You can be CEO, but there's some things that you have to work on. That's a constructive noise that's realistic and helpful. And that you want to continue to think through in that quiet period, but push away the non-constructive, non-helpful, repeating patterns. That just needs to be pushed away.
So take us through a pattern of a day. How does clarity of your mind and your thoughts, how do you do that? Like what are some of the practical steps that our listeners could go through to assure that they're approaching their work and their life with a mind that's sort of ready for the challenges ahead?
I think starting the day very quietly is important. Some people start with exercise, walking the dog, taking your kids to school, having some movement. And then before jumping right into a meeting, actually having a blank piece of paper for me or a computer screen and think, what do I want to accomplish today? Of all the things that mattered to me yesterday, do they still matter? And then making an intentional list of what's important. And in my industry, things are pivoting and changing so quickly. We don't have the luxury of constantly making a plan and sticking to it for an entire year like we did before, but we have to take in new information and we have to throw out others. And then really just starting to make sure you review your calendar, you set up the meetings ahead to meet that intention. I actually do that daily.
Mm. I think it's so important too, because there's a recency bias that we can get into, right? It's like the last piece of information that we had. How does that really influence where we're going with things? So by sitting down and being introspective about all of the pieces that led us to where we are today and what we're about to do is so important, because otherwise you're sort of moving from one piece of information to the next thing you're making a decision on, and without quieting your mind and being able to sort of prioritize and understand those pieces. For me, it's been a lot of prayer in my life, because I feel like that's my place of finding that silence and that introspection and the direction and guidance. But I love the idea of coming up with sort of your own way of sort of centering and quieting the noise.
Yeah, and my mind is full of ideas. It's very curious. It's got crazy ideas, and I'm a huge note taker. Anyone who sits next to me will see that that's the way I intake information. I just take notes actively. And then I reflect back on my notes. I can't believe how many ideas I completely threw out. I mean, they were a great thought, but you can't honor every single thought that you have. So then you have to pick and choose, and then you make your bets. And that has to be a very intentional thing, in my view. Again, something that moves the needle, something that if you were doing your full-time job, but you wanted to innovate, that might have to be a nighttime job or a side hustle or something that you could invest a little extra gamble in your career. I did a lot of that. I think that really is huge, and not be afraid, as I mentioned before, to fail. But you want to fail quickly, pivot smartly, and then try to be agile to opportunities that present themselves, because you would never have any idea what could be thrown at you
Right.
at all times. You just don't have that kind of control.
I feel like one of the big learnings for me, leaving a full-time job and now sitting on boards, being an independent fund trustee, having this podcast, being a writer and having my debut coming out,
Wow.
and a wife and a mom, and all of those pieces, the cognitive load on my brain sometimes, and I really thought that this would be maybe a time of more quiet, but because there's so many desperate and different challenges hitting me all the time, and women in ETFs on the board of that, and
Yeah.
this last year and our globalization. So maybe give us, I think we all have heard a lot of the concerns, the fear around AI, but maybe help us focus a little bit on how you see AI supporting the cognitive load that we've some of us have allowed and maybe even invited into our lives.
The AI is out of the box or out of the bag, and you can't put it back. And AI is a tremendous tool. Everyone knows that. I don't need to tell that story, but it has scary downside. I think Elon Musk said it was 15-20% potential downside to humanity. That's totally unacceptable. And so far, the benefits of AI are beginning to come together. I think they're pretty amazing, but some of it really fun, like AI images. But what can go wrong could be also quite frightening. And for me personally, I feel the need that we need to have AI companies that are human compatible, that are human beneficial, and to really create an AI that helps people to augment their ability to spend more time in that clear mind space. That's one huge potential benefit is once you write your investment thesis, now you have to rewrite it 100 times for your ETF to be launched and then the regulatory approval across 80 ETFs. A lot of that can be automated. And AI can also give you ideas and give you the first draft for you to be able to create even better quality content. And ultimately, we want to remove some of the workload that is highly important because they're regulatory reports, but they're not really something that adds that much value. Whereas we want to focus on things that really can move the needle. And more, we're working on ways that we can really propel the human brain to be even better with the assistance of AI. So that's our goal, is to use AI in a positive way for humans.
Yes. So that sort of human AI interaction piece, do you spend time and how often with your sort of senior team of trying to figure out are there lines, or are there just sort of these concepts of what it is to be good AI? you know, like how do you see it? What is the framework around it?
Yeah, I mean, hallucination is bad. Reporting to regulators information that is not true is a problem. So, I mean, there is no gray in financial services. It's one of the most regulated industries. In order for us to have a business, there's so much that AI can be used as a tool to help in making sure that we're more compliant, right, with what we're reporting, what we're writing. And ultimately, having an AI produce reports, having still human intervention, assisting the compliance departments to help to identify when they correct a word because it might be selling the fund too aggressively, that would be recorded and that could be applied broadly. I think these are amazing tools that could benefit compliance, which is ultimately where we always start with Daisy in the financial services world.
Thank you. So, one of the things that I admire about you, Deb, and I see it in so many of our interactions and so many of the ways that you've led women in ETFs in EMEA, is you've got this sense of entrepreneurship that is just, you can tell you have a passion for it. You can tell in the way that you light up. I can tell in your voice. Um, and not everyone does. There is, I think maybe people dream of being the CEO of a business and starting it from scratch and all those pieces, but really, there's a lot of fear around it. So tell me a little bit about what drives this passion, and how people maybe can self-diagnose a little bit of whether they really are set out and apart for entrepreneurship.
I mean, first of all, it's been really hard. When I graduated Harvard Business School, there were 20% women in my class, and today there's 45. So I
Mm.
think there's more community, and seeing more women leaders, seeing that there are asset management firms like Valerie Botson, the head of Amundi. It's great to have those role models out there and seeing that. And then wanting to push to be better as an industry, right? Innovation could be process innovation, it could be product innovation, it could be just communicating financial services so it's less repellent. I mean, I was talking about my 14-year-old daughter who has no interest in financial services or AI because AI steals art. And I said, well, that's a downside, but let's try to see how we could, the tools out there, what can we do to make sure that we guide it towards a better outcome. And so those are problems that is out there for us to solve and for us to pick and choose which ones we want to focus on. So again, it goes back to making a bet and deciding which bet to choose. And I think when I speak with a lot of women over the years, I mean, we have this amazing women in ETFs community in EMEA, but also throughout the US and Asia, where I also worked. I mean, the women are very aspirational. They're very ambitious. I read an interesting book that the mind is often focused on these negative thoughts that pull you down. And really, women do want to play big. If that's the case, then we need to create the frameworks and help women get there. But I believe the ambition is there.
Yes. And bringing it back to the holding your thoughts captive, taking and really examining some of your assumptions and your thoughts so that you can clear out those that aren't helpful and be able to come back to that clarity of mind. So I'll just kind of bring it right back to the conflict that we started with, because before we got on, you talked a little bit about your daughter and I, of just that 14-year-old mind that is like coming into her own and finds ways to conflict with the things that we're passionate about. And I had the same 14-year-old who is now older now. And I was sharing, listeners, I was sharing this with Deb before that, like, she called me the other night to like bounce off an idea that she knew I disagreed with, only to actually hear my side of it so that she could think more critically about it. And to me, that was a huge win that like all the parenting we do and everything that we do to try to influence this next generation and trying to do it in a place of empathy, but also truth and not compromising kind of who we are and what we believe in.
Amazing.
And not talking down to this next generation too. So just for all of us out there, that being who we are and having that clarity of thought of how we express ourselves is so important. So taking the time each day, especially as we begin the day. Thank you for that reminder.
And it's very painful. But when your daughters and sons, they rebel, that's a show of strength. So they're practicing their strength onto you. And hopefully they'll come back the way your kids have come back. We just have to keep that in mind, that they're just growing their ability to challenge.
Yes. And which is so important. And sometimes you have to test out, like you were saying before, you're testing out and you're making your bets, and teens are doing that as well. And sometimes they test out their hardest things and their more controversial ways of speaking with us because we're safe.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've become a little bit of that voice of calm, and it will get better for a lot of my friends because I've been able to see it.
Post-teen.
Yes. Full circle.
It's wonderful, Kristine.
Well, thank you so much, Deb, for this conversation. I really appreciate your thoughts and you and all that you're doing for good in the world.
Thanks, Kristine. Such a pleasure to be here, and amazing work on your side, too. I can't imagine how many women that you've interviewed, and each and every one of them more inspiring than the other. It's just, wow. Well done.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thank you, our listeners, for spending your time with us. I hope this is not just information, but you let it be transformational in how you think about your career. I'm rooting for you. If you're an Apple user, I'd really appreciate it if you took a few seconds to leave a rating and a review. Your ratings and reviews tell Apple that this is a podcast worth listening to. And in turn, your reviews will help We Talk Careers get in front of more listeners looking to succeed, just like you. And while you're there, go ahead and hit that follow button, because there's going to be another brand new episode and you don't want to miss it. Until then, keep thriving. Thank you for listening.